Hello, Angie. Welcome to another this episode of the Grief and Heartbreak Sessions with me.
Thank you, Austin.
I definitely knew that I wanted you as one of the guests to speak to this grief and heartbreak. And where will I begin? I want what I really appreciate about you and our friendship is your journey of integration and like what I get about you is like a long journey of integration. Like this is not new for you. You've been doing this for quite a while, and a lot of wisdom and perspective that you bring. This is one of the things why I come close to you. And where I'll start is today, like this very day. If someone asks you at a coffee shop or a friend says, "What even does this grief thing mean?" Like, it's just sadness. Is it just this? Is it that? Like, as today with all the loops of grief that you've been going through over the years and our conversations, what do you even say if someone asks you what is grief today?
Ooh, okay. So, what is grief today for me is it's a part of a process. It's a process between two things. Um, Grief is the feeling and the embodiment of the emotions and experience of loss that is a beautiful and necessary part of moving from death into rebirth. I think that's basically what I would say.
Whoa, whoa. The process, a beautiful, necessary process from death into rebirth, a change state between two things.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does seem specifically to be the kind of emotional experience and state.
Mm. When did Looking back now, when did you start to connect with the emotional state of grief? Like not grief, like forcing change, like or not life, like in the forcing of change, or like the change, like with or without us. But like, when did you start to? What's your journey like with the emotions of grief and connecting, like starting to learn about grief yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, trying to think how old that I was. Well, in the year 2000, um, which I remember because the Olympics were coming through my hometown. I was in Australia at the time. My great grandfather died, and that was the closest person to me that had died at that time in my life. I guess I must have been either 12 or 13 at that time. And he died, and my family, my parents and my sisters, just on some level acted like nothing had changed. My sisters were going to be in a sort of festivity or parade or something around the Olympic torch coming through my town. And my parents decided that it was more important for my sisters to do that than it was for us to travel to Queensland, a different state, to attend my great grandfather's funeral. And I don't know if I would have called it grief at that time necessarily, but something in my system felt that that was very wrong. And I had the experience of not being able to have what felt to me like an important sacred space for that grief. Even at that age, I had this internal desire to go to the funeral and be able to be there. Um, so there was a grief at this change um, that was it was an inevitable change. There's nothing to do about it. People die, But almost the more interesting aspect of the grief that hit me is the grief of not being able to go and celebrate that death and be with my other family members, my extended family, for that transition process. So that's going to be one of the first times. Although as I was speaking, another thought came to mind, which is even just prior to that, we had moved from my hometown in Australia to the United States, and then we'd moved back. And each of those transitions, also being a child, I didn't really have control over those either. But each of those transitions brought with it a certain sense of loss and big change, and then grief associated with losing. When I moved from my small town to Tucson, Arizona, the first time, I basically had some process of grief, an experience of grief around losing kind of contact with everything that I'd ever known. So all of my friends that I'd had from a very, very young age, some of my earliest memories were there in that town, and um, did experience having to go through the emotions of letting that go and being very sad about that, and then coming to the States and suddenly being in a whole new world, which in the end did bring a lot of positive things into my life. But I remember that first time we came here, it was a little bit tampered by the fact that I was really actively missing um, life in Australia. And that's one of the things about grief that I have noticed is you can sort of hold on to it and drag it out as and it can
Mm.
be with you in waves, and there's some aspects of it that never go away. Like as I'm sitting here today, on occasion I'll still think about how could life have been different if I had stayed in Australia, if my parents had made different decisions, for example. Um, and there's a little small bit of grief there occasionally when I notice, for example, I've met people in Portland where I live now who've lived in Portland their whole lives. And there's a way of being connected to the land that you're born on that when I go back to Australia, I feel it. And so I can even still have an ongoing process of grief around, even though I feel very connected to my life here. And I wouldn't at this point choose to move somewhere else. Like the grief is kind of settled in my system, but I've noticed that there is little bits of it that'll still be there. Um,
Mm.
time, yeah.
Did your parents or any adults ever broach this topic of emotions and sadness, anger, frustration, or like any of the things that come up with grief? Was this ever talked about for you growing up?
Um, I'm trying to think. So certainly the first example I used when my great grandfather died, I don't think it was talked about very much. There was kind of this top-down decision made by my parents, and that was it. Um, when we were moving between countries, my mom was demonstrating being in the emotional state of grief very well. She was openly crying about leaving her family and all that she had known in Australia. So I don't remember there being an actual conversation about it, but certainly it was um, like accepted as a normal part of the move that we might be sad. And there was the demonstration by my mom. But on the other hand, my dad tends to be more of a stoic emotions inside type of person. And so we also had a demonstration of no significant emotional experience that was outwardly visible. Um, the first time I really remember grieving process being talked about was about a year after we moved to the States permanently. I had a very, very close friend die suddenly because of his heart just stopped. So it was kind of
Mm.
just out of nowhere. Suddenly, Matt was dead. And
And this was after your great grandfather
yeah, this was once that
experience.
this
Okay.
was, it would have been about a year and a half later. So we'd
Mhm.
moved to the States not long after my great grandfather died. I had started to develop some deep friendships. So this wasn't a long friendship, but it was one of the closest, if not the closest I had at the time locally. And when Matt died, I did go to Matt's funeral. I remember my mom telling me that I might want to remember he was cremated and his um, remains were put at the church where he went to and where my mom and also we attended at the time. And my mom pointed out that I might want to know where that was so I could go visit it. So that's
Mm.
kind of pointing in that direction.
Mhm.
And there was support of me taking time to be with my feelings and not having to like go back to school immediately, for example, is one thing I remember. And then I did for years after that, that little like graveyard type area became a place that I would go for comfort and to feel close to Matt. And I think that's the first
Mm.
time it was kind of explicitly talked with me about. And then I also at the time had the support of Matt had an older brother, and me and his older brother got to talk about what had happened. And in that case, I did feel like there was more support and space and like explicit conversation of, when someone dies, when something like this happens, these feelings come up, and you can, and they're not, they're normal and they're necessary. And sort of the message I got was crying's important, remembering the person's important, and having little rituals around how
Mm.
that goes can be important. So a very
Mhm.
different story than what I had gotten actually not that long before from also my parents.
Mhm.
But to me, that signified my parents making some assumptions about what was going to be important to me and also my sisters at the time, and then balancing those interests.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like death and major life uprooting were some really, yeah, big changes. And I get the, yeah, some really big, of course, common common doorways to grief. What what was next on your grief journey? Was there other death or other changes, or were there other kinds of things that would you would discover in the next chapters of your relationship with grief?
Yeah. So there was, let's see, I'm not always great at chronological, but I did have another very close person to me die when I was either 18 or 19, I think 18. So there was some time, 5 years in between there. Um, so I had some, and then I had my great grandmother die, and then my grandfather. So there's sort of like some periodic deaths that are close to me that have occurred over my life, and then more recently too. And then in addition to like physical death of a human that I would know or love, um, I have a way of getting quite attached to where I am. So things like changing schools or moving houses, even in the same town, would kick up those type of same similar feelings in me. And I didn't have necessarily the types of like romantic or dating relationships in high school that were pulling that up, but certainly by college, big, big romantic or intimate relationships ending or changing, I noticed also would tap into the same type of emotional range. Um, and then as I continue to develop myself, I noticed too that there's other forms of grief, like around even things like expectations. If I
Mm.
notice I'm expecting or planning for a certain outcome or way of things to go, and then it becomes obvious something changes and it's not going to go that way, there can even be that type of grief.
Mhm.
Um, and then the other thing. that has unfolded for me over the years is a kind of anticipatory grief as well, or what I call a pre-grieving process, to where if I know a big change is coming up, or maybe I'm choosing to make the change, so I'm very aware it's coming up, and I do have autonomy and sort of choice in the matter. Um, yeah, either that or I just know it's coming up. The two things that are coming to mind specifically right now are when a dog that I had for about 15 years was dying. I knew she was
Hmm.
dying and she was in a process for about a year prior to actually leaving her body. And with her, I noticed that it was very useful, in fact, to allow myself to feel everything that was coming through me, which was like grieving while she was still here, because if I could release and move some of those emotions and let them flow through, then I'd be able to be with her peacefully and really present with her and
Mm.
enjoy the last time that she had here. And I would just let myself periodically fall into the grief, because I noticed if I didn't give it that space, it would be at this kind of like low level all the time. And then I wasn't really able to be present with her. So that was a big change and example for me and how that worked. And then the
Now
other,
talk about we talk about that part. You said it would be low level, but then you would get the clue to let yourself fall into the grief. Will you double click on that and share a bit more about that part?
oh
What
yeah,
did it look
yeah.
like for you to fall into the grief?
Yeah, so it was interesting. Me and my dog, so my dog's name is Dulce, and me and Dulce would go on long walks in natural areas around Portland, most days, if not every day, especially towards the end of her life. And there were times where if I was trying to hold back the grief, I wouldn't always be aware I was doing this, but I'd be able to tell eventually. If I'm trying to hold it back, we might be out walking around near a creek or a river that I love, that she loves. And I wouldn't be crying, but I would notice myself not present with her either, and just feeling this kind of trapped, um, yeah, I just noticed my hands are doing this, and that's about right. Like, would almost be like accidentally using a lot of energy to hold in this grief. And what I would be telling myself, the story that goes with that is, she's not even dead yet. She's still here. It's not time to grieve yet. And I would be kind of
Mm.
telling myself a story that it was wrong to have that emotional experience while she was still here. And what I noticed was,
Mm.
once I started to really address that voice, I would say, yes, she's still here, but I know I'm going to lose her and I want to be present right now. And I would, when I would notice my system getting like this, it would be like, okay, it's time to release. And sometimes I would do that, be able to make that shift on my own. And other times there would be um, something environmental that would trigger the change. A really great example of this is I was out walking in one of my favorite parks, and I was kind of feeling that way. And a woman with no dog walked up to me and started talking to me. And she could tell Dulce was quite old from the way that Dulce was. And she just came up and she looked at me and she said directly to me, I've been through what you're going through. I understand what you're experiencing right now.
Mm.
And I was just like, whoa, you do? And she's like, yeah, I lost a dog that I'd had for a very long time, 6 months ago. And it's a really hard part of the process, what you're in. And then we cried together. She said
Mm.
this to
Wow.
me. There was this really deep recognition. And then she started crying and I started crying. And after that, I felt better. We hugged. We'd never met each other before. I'd never seen her again and don't know her name. We hugged at the end of our crying together. And then I walked with Dulce on the way I was going, and she continued the way she was going. And the rest of that walk, I was the most present and really with Dulce, just enjoying being with her that I'd been in a long time. And it really got my attention. Um, and so now, since then, it's when I notice that sort of feeling in my system, I follow it, and I usually will do what I can to make space for it and let it out, because I know that if I can do that, then I'll be able to stay present with the ending that's going on and really be there. And the other thing that I've noticed is then when the actual change happens, when the whether it's a death of Dulce or another really big example of this in my life was the end of a 14-year relationship that I was in. Um, as the known kind of endpoint or relatively known endpoint approaches, and then the thresholds crossed on the other side, it's like there's a little bit more, it feels like, of a peaceful release. And of course, there's still more grieving to do. It's not like pre-grieving will once you can't actually like preemptively feel something before the thing has happened, but there's this deep sense of already peace with the transition, and you're already kind of in the process emotionally. And to me, that helps things also as the transition occurs. Then you can fully release into that grief space again. But instead of having all of this built up or even possibly regret about not being there and not feeling what you're feeling,
Hmm.
you just have the pure grief of the actual transition that's occurred. Um,
Mm.
I don't know how much sense that all made, but that's, yeah.
Yeah, I want to reflect back some of this because this is really beautiful. I get that you discovered, and probably not unique to you, but actually quite common for most of us, is like this thought where that grief only takes place after a threshold or whatever the idea of what that threshold could be, and only can like allow the grief to happen then. And what I hear now is that you're discovering is your term for it, like pre-grief, like, or maybe it's just like grieving does start before a threshold, or something is like that the signals that change is happening, or the signals and awareness that life is continuing to shift and change and not stay static, but it's moving forward. And the signals already are, yeah, even before the threshold comes, there's like the flag or the awareness or the staring in the face and inevitability of the threshold of change or a specific threshold. And that you're learning, what was really rich to me is you're learning the sensations and the cues, the internal cues of what that pre-grief is, and like the hands holding it in, and noticing the relief of like letting it have some space, which that's gonna maybe that's my next question of like, what are you doing to give it space? But like in giving that space, you become much more present to stay with the precious thing that's right there, and that's not, the threshold hasn't passed yet. And so a way of like, instead of this low level distance to keep from what's there before even the threshold is passed, and this dog is gone, in this case Dulce is gone, giving it that space allowed you to come back to presence with the precious moments that was actually in reality there at the moment. Something
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I like the way you just framed part of that more as what I was getting is there's kind of like a window around a time, around a transition or a change where grief is active in the system, and that starts before the threshold and continues until after it. Yeah, that feels like a really beautiful framing.
And there's something so precious, there's some kind of wisdom that I'm gleaning about this, that if you said about like assumptions and expectations also being the clue of like this inbuilt resistance to change, of like this inbuilt fighting resistance to grief and change, and noticing if I can have this same thing of like thresholds like it's all the way down to the small things, like it's like to this breath, like I'm breathing out this last breath and I don't know if I get another breath. And then I can become like, when I notice that and let myself feel, wow, yeah, I don't actually know, I can't assume or have an expectation of my next breath, then I become more in full of gratitude and joy and of the preciousness of the breath. And so when I see like all the way down the small scale, the daily, minute by minute, but also lifetime, like with humans or pets, there's something here that I'm gleaning in my own research about, can I always be in contact with like, and like let go of these assumptions and expectations that life is not changing, and that I'm doing a lot of this a lot of times about the micro and the macro. And can I, yeah, what are the practices to give myself the ability for the breath, for the dog, for the death, for job change, for waking up again, let myself be able to grieve that no, this is the like the yin yang spiral, like this is just change is just inevitable, like nothing is permanent thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so in terms of you had asked about like specific practices for allowing the grief to release, for allowing yourself to be present with the grief. And I mean, one of the very most obvious ones is creating space and a sort of internal acceptance and even um, perhaps loving relationship with crying. Crying is one of the very nice ways to move and release energy. It's a type of energetic purging, but it's also a type of deep feeling. Um,
Well, you said obviously. I want to ask if you share it again, but have an assumption or like don't carry an assumption that any of us have anything obvious because I might gather something that is obvious to you and not to me, and maybe somebody else listening as well too. So I'm
oh,
curious if
great,
yeah, you'll
great.
just
I
go
appreciate that.
bit
Yeah.
by bit so we can hear the things.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and I use the word obviously there because crying comes very naturally to me personally, but you're completely right. That is it's actually in some ways not even taught to us to be accessible in the Western culture in a lot of senses. It's more like taught to be something that we don't do. But so in that respect, okay, in order to move through and feel and really deeply feel, but also move grief rather than holding it in, one of the more effective ways that I've come across that I work with is intentionally creating spaces to cry, um, and tap into that natural way that we all do have, that our bodies do move and release energy. And how can that look like? Um,
Yes, please. Yeah, sure.
yeah. So often for me, I've done, especially in the sort of more recent years of my life, I might have a specific candle. And currently, I even have a practice where I will carve on the candle what's being released, and I might burn it for a period of time, but not all day, every day. And it'll be kind of set out as a grief altar or a grief space where when I light the candle, that's the time my system knows, okay, now we're processing this change. One of the more effective ways that I've used that tool was when my 14-year relationship was ending and my ex-partner was moving out of the house we lived in together. So I knew she was moving and I was having a lot of trouble, not just kind of chaotically experiencing that grief. And it was very
Mm.
much messing with the last time that I had with Steph in person. And of course, we were both very sad that our relationship was well, maybe not of course, the edited again. We were both very sad that our relationship was ending, but we both still love each other a lot. And so there were these very precious moments. And actually, my therapist, which was our relationship therapist at the time, said to me, Angie, I know that you sometimes have a practice of having candles on an altar when a change is happening. She'd known this about me because I was doing it with the dog Dulce. Um, and she very much encouraged me to actually create a whole separate space than my regular altar
Mm.
and to have a grief altar specifically for mine and Steph's relationship transition and a candle
Mm.
there. And in that particular case, my therapist suggested, and it was a very good suggestion that I followed, sit with that every morning just for 5 minutes so that you're consistently
Wow.
having a space to let that move and see if that might shift how you are in the rest of your life. And it really did. It really helped me get through that transition because basically what I would have a practice of doing is my usual practice is to get up in the morning and journal for a little bit and then meditate. And then I'll usually journal after that and then move on into my day, usually with some physical activity next. But I just added into there a specific piece which would be get up and journal about how I'm doing generally, but then intentionally move to my grief altar, light that candle, and allow myself to be with whatever was there. And some days it would be crying. A lot of days it was like crying and really just feeling deeply in my chest and in my body the pain of what was being lost. And then other days it would be, I noticed that it could be sitting there with some kind of already hopefulness about what might be next in my life. And I would allow that
Mm.
too, and not sort of the the kind of biggest thing that feels really important to mention is there's not really a wrong way. Sometimes grieving can also look like
Mm.
laughing. Sometimes grieving can also look like writing poetry. You know, there's
Mm.
it's not every once in a while it looked like absolutely intense rage, like so parts of me so angry that this transition was happening at all, and feelings of this didn't have to be this way, or that kind of bargaining also a big part. But setting out this intentional container for that really actually allowed me to go deeply into those things, because also I knew I wasn't going to be stuck in that state. I think that's another thing that I've heard from people, and on occasion I've had that feeling to myself where, oh, if I really let myself go into this thing, then I'm going to fall down a hole and I won't be able to get back out of it, or there's not a bottom
Mm.
to this
Mhm.
feeling. And so creating this space for it actually allows, well, even if there were to be no bottom to the feeling and this feeling's going to be here forever, creating a container where that experience of that feeling can be allows that's perfectly okay too. What I noticed over time is that, at least for me, it's not like an endless thing, and the grief itself also changes over time and
Mm.
gets less. And in time, new things start to come in, and then that's where the rebirth part is happening. And so you're starting to experience, oh well, here's how life looks on the other side of this threshold. And at a certain point from a transition, even the transition of, say, like of Dulce dying, to go back to that one, um Dulce had a very beautiful transition right after her death. I was really feeling her with me. I kept the candle burning, one of the candles that I had, through her death transition. And I had actually had a energetic conversation with Dulce in which I was like, I stay here as long as you want, but when this candle goes out, like, please, if you want to, like, move on to what's next for you, and I'm gonna take that as my cue to start moving that direction for myself as well. And then in time, these things take less and less time, and I can still every once in a while be somewhere and just have some grief or cry because I do miss Dulce, or have
Mhm.
with the relationship with Steph some grief or cry because I do miss aspects of that. But at the same time, and I've got two parallel things going on here, but at the same time, with respect to Dulce, there are things I enjoy a lot about not having a dog that I'm responsible for at this point in my life. There's elements of
Mhm.
freedom there that I didn't have the whole time she was alive, and I can lean into that. I have relationships with cats that live on the land I live on. Well, Dulce wouldn't really have wanted me to have relationships with the cats.
Mhm.
She would chase them away. That's
Mhm.
how she always would have been about it. And then similarly with Steph, we're now at a couple years out from our relationship transition, and we can get on the phone and talk with each other about all the beautiful, new, and exciting things in each of our lives. And we can kind of look at how when we were together, we had certain things, but they were preventing each of us from having other things. So for her, she gets to live in Arizona near her family, which was very important to her. And for me, I get to live in this tiny house and be a little more focused on building a deeper, wider network of community than just living with Steph, and being a little
Mhm.
limited in that respect. And there's this beautiful thing I've noticed with her too, where when our decisions aren't closely tied together, because we're not in this entangled relationship where we're sharing finances and a house and our decisions really impact each other, we can truly be happy for each other being as very different from each other as we are.
Mm.
So that's, I guess, the next piece is that in time, that the sort of grief for me in many cases will fold into a type of celebration of the life of what was there, and also celebration
Mhm.
of what's coming afterwards.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was almost seeing you like I don't know if you were doing this or not, but make the infinity symbol, which I know is important to you. But I was almost seeing like the death and resurrection show, or like the death and
Yes,
rebirth cycle. I was almost seeing you like come around
yes.
and feed each other. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but uh,
It wasn't intentional. In fact, I wasn't aware of it until you brought it to my attention. However, yes, that I mean it's one of my most most
yeah.
relied on symbols, and specifically being in the middle of it, balanced like that. And as you were just describing this, I noticed I even was moving like that myself, but I hadn't been aware of
Mhm.
it. So yeah, I do. I think they feed each other, and you can stay present in them in that middle moment of them. Um, and I love that. Yeah, that what we're coming to here is a kind of dance where they feed each other. One feeds into the other. You have the grief of what's not there, and you move into the presence and joy of what is, and then that's going to shift, and you come back into a grief of what is being lost. But that makes way for the new thing. And this kind of process is actually happening all the time, as you mentioned, because grief comes up with big and small things, and we can bring it down as tight as I mean, especially like having my friend die so suddenly, I from a young age have been very aware we don't know if we're going to keep breathing. We
Mhm.
could. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's also reminding me of um, the composition process and decay and the rotten and the death becoming the next fertile soil for the next life. Like everything that is alive, like like we're built on, like I am built on every breath, everything that I have, the trees is everything that is built on the death and decay, the decomposition of what has come before. It's all the fertile soil we stand on comes from this richness and this price even. And so yeah, somehow also too, just getting the picture of the decomposition process and how it yeah it feeds and becomes the new fertile soil for the next like the next joy, the next stage, like you mentioned, the next experiment, the next adventure, the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would even go so far as to say we can't, I mean, we can't get to the next thing without that death part of the process.
Mm.
So they go together and they, they just are that sort of life and death. And then grief being a very important transitional piece to that process for our experience of being human. Um, yeah.
One other piece I want to ask about, well, there's two things, and I'll say it so I don't forget the second one. The second one I want to ask about how you involve others and like what you do alone, and maybe some even um, importance of some parts, some bits that you carry alone, intentionally or unintentionally, and also with others. This is my second question I want to ask. Maybe this will be the last question, but the first question I've asked first is you mentioned this idea, and even I know this experience as well too, of like the sense of like the endless sadness or the endless hole of like that has no bottom. And I was hearing that one way that you're navigating this is by having a specific container to tap into it, because like this is what I've been experimenting with as well too. I'll say, okay, you get 30 minutes today, and whatever comes, happens, sounds, feelings, emotions, victim stories, blah blah blah, anything and everything. After that though, I will close the space, respectfully transition, and then we've got to go get shit done and got to go like move and create and do all the responsible things. But for this 30 minutes, like something like this is what I've been experimenting. I was hearing you almost point towards something like this. Will you share what you have about this?
Um, yeah, so that's kind of been the takeaway is if it doesn't kind of accepting that on some level there is an endless well of grief, if you will. And that's because things are always changing, stuff is always dying. And if the intentional space is created, then yeah, my experience of that, which sounds quite similar to what you're talking about, is that my system starts to know, oh, this is the space for that. And then it becomes fairly, I mean, almost easy, exactly easy to move out of that space again and into the different aspects and spaces of life, because the the system, I call them sort of my self energetic embody, my system, that it is aware it has that time and space, so it will, in many circumstances, and of course grief can spontaneously come up and erupt as well, and that also is okay. But having that intentional space, there's like a sense that there's always a space to release, always a space to deeply feel these things, so they're not getting held in. And even actually, if I'm out enjoying something or doing something that I want to be really present for, having the space to have felt the grief separately and intentionally allows the full presence with whatever the fun thing is. Like, for example, really being present with a friend or a loved one that's here now, and we're maybe like going for a walk, or I want to hear about what's going on with them, or we're enjoying dancing together or playing or whatever that we're doing. If I am intentionally creating space for my grief, then I'm much more likely to be able to be fully present in that moment too, because I'm being fully present with the grief when it's there. So
Mm.
all of it becomes about this kind of practice of presence, but also intentionality around what aspect of this kind of multidimensional life that we live are we going to be present with in the moment. So I think that at least kind of answers what you're pointing at. I'm not sure if
Mhm.
there's more there that you would like to explore.
Well, the next thing is coming of like when when you do make space or it happens spontaneously or even something else like but the when the grief is you're walking with the grief, what have you noticed about walking with it, feeling it alone versus having other people on your team for like physical holding, physical nourishment, or holding space, or maybe something else? I'm curious about this. Yeah, will you share what you where you're at, what you discovered about what maybe you carry solitary and what you also want to have others with you and how that would be?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So there's certain, well, so like the morning practice that I was sharing about, that's solitary for me. I do my morning practice by myself, and I really value and protect that time to be with myself.
Mm,
And that is true with my grief practices as well. It depends a little bit on the set of circumstances. One thing that can be very powerful is to be with other people that are grieving either the very same shift or their own shift. Um, and that can look different ways. So like when the big relationship was ending, we would at times like actually cry together and hold each other. So we're providing comfort for each other, even though we're both going through the same experience of losing this relationship. And in fact, we're the ones we're losing also. And that was a very powerful and potent experience. Um, that also needed to be a little bit in a container. We couldn't spend the whole time that we were together once we decided we were moving apart doing that. But I found those moments to be very
mm,
powerful, um, because of the recognition of we're actually going through this together and we have our unique experiences, but we're really going through this together. Similarly, all the way back to my friend Matt dying, going to the funeral was incredibly powerful for me to be with family members and other of Matt's friends, and even people that I knew were connected to Matt that I had never met before. It was a very powerful field experience for me to be in that collective shared field with with others who were experiencing the same loss. Um, it feels a little late to sort of start bringing in a completely new thing, but I'm going to just briefly, which is there are times in space where, well, it connects a little bit. So even a stranger, someone that you don't know that's not going through the same thing, but might have had a related experience in the past, can be a very powerful companion. So the woman that I
Mm.
happened to meet while I was out with Dulce and us being able to cry together, it was very potent and powerful in that moment that someone else be there. And what's interesting in that particular moment is I'd gone out by myself with Dulce and feeling that I did not want to be with anyone else, feeling that I
Mm.
didn't want a friend with me, I didn't want a loved one with me, but having this complete stranger interaction where this just other human being was with me shifted a lot for me and was very powerful. So one thing I've spent about 5.5 years of my life doing is showing up for other people in the moment when something traumatic happens. It's often a house
Mm.
fire or a loved one has died. Those are the two most common scenarios, but there can be others. And what I learned through that work as the person that would show up and be with someone else, literally hold them, hold their hand, just be fully present with someone else's grief in that moment, is that it's also incredibly powerful to be held by and have someone else present, even if you don't know them, but another human that can simply be present with and empathize with the grief you're going through. And so I've experienced that a little bit on both sides, although more often as the person actually showing up to provide that support. But what I've learned through being
Mm.
with hundreds of people in that capacity is that there's something incredibly valuable in human presence when we're in those moments. So those in those particular moments, like there's an end to that as well. That the containers all, I mean, the more many grief endings, but there's a little end to the container. It's not like we're gonna stay with this human or family of humans indefinitely, but just it's very powerful to have someone present, especially in the immediacy of something happening. When I got a divorce, this is a good one. I had a very dear friend come with me to the courthouse because I knew I did not want to do that alone. I did not want to actually cross that threshold alone. And the day felt like a combination of grieving and sadness and just like total celebration of sort of this new chapter that was opening up. So
Mm.
I guess that's another place too, as much as sharing the grief can be really helpful, sharing the celebration, sharing what's new as well, being able to tell people stories about the thing that's shifting. Um,
Mm.
Very powerful.
Wow. Also hearing like that, like being of service as well is also a beautiful way to support oneself. Like, yeah, to hold space for other people's grief and uh yeah, to be a witness and be with others in their traumatic events and their in the moment of also being a powerful part of the process.
Yeah, I believe that's right. It really is. There's something there that just deeply connects with the sort of the humanity in the experience, the real heart and emotion of the experience. And it's very challenging to feel like you're alone or isolated if you're being there for someone else as well as
Mm.
being there for yourself, because when you're there for someone else, you're more likely, at least from my experience, when I show up for other people in those moments, I'm much more likely to remember to ask for someone to show up for me
Mm.
and to accept
Mhm.
that because I know what both sides of that are like then.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I want to tell you what happened literally before I had to stop this phone call because it was coming up on this call with you. Um, I had this experience of somebody from such a surprising place want like being there for me. I work with seniors, and somebody called and asked me about some of the insurance specifics with something. So I called them. Older man, I've helped him for several years. sweet man, but he had a question. But first, he asked me, "How are you?" And actually, I remember you and I have talked about this, that I'm still working through it. Like there's some kind of like specific wound and like reactivity that like comes up around this question of like people like asking this question, but most of the time it's not a real question. It's just the polite thing to go to the next thing. Almost like, well, almost like this like subtle manipulation thing of like I'm making sure I'm proper so that way I can um you don't think I'm bad, and then like now you can help me, or whatever. Like anyway, there's
Yeah.
some kind of big wound that I've been going through for a while, and this person asked, "How are you?" And I had an assumption that it was just kind of like sometimes I have the energy or the desire to actually go for it and say, "Actually, let me really tell you. I really want to tell you." This
Mm.
time I was just like, this person's not really care. I was like, "I'm okay. I'm good." And he stopped me. He's like, I don't remember how he said it. This has not happened to me often. Most time people just say, "Okay, yeah, good, great. Here's the question." He said, "Austin, something like I don't quite believe you. I hear
Wow.
something else. I hear something else in your voice." It was real tender. "I hear something else in your voice." And this again, this assumption or expectation that he was just wanting to get on to the next thing. I could hear the presence and the slowness in his voice. There was no hurry to go anywhere, but just be there. And it was from a work call with a client that I didn't know. I knew he was a nice man, but I didn't have any expectation to be touched like this. And the conversation just completely shifted and slowed down to something completely different possible. And he asked to hold space. He's like, "Do you have something you just want to get off of your chest? I really want to know. I'm 70 years old and I've seen a lot, been through a lot, had a lot of down days. Do you want to just get something off your chest?" And I was so touched by this gesture, this man, that I did. I shared for 10 minutes and let myself be vulnerable with him. And so I love that. Like I was just coming into this call, just like so in awe of like, my God, like how beautiful it is when strangers care enough to really be present and ask and say, "How are you really doing? Are you hurting? Can I be with you? I'm on your team," or something. And so, yeah,
Mm.
this came in actually like literally. I ended the call 2 minutes before we hopped on here, and so
Mm. Thank you for
it's
sharing.
fun.
That's beautiful. I
There are
love the
people in the
timing.
world like this. There are people in the world like
That's it.
this.
That's probably the best takeaway message from this entire call.
Yeah. Mm, I think I have one more question. Yeah, I
Okay.
do. I'm curious about. I mean, I don't know what this means. This term is necessarily, but I hear people say conscious uncoupling or something, and I'm wondering about what you and it was Steph, right? Yeah, like there's like sense of awe and wonder about you two being able after 14 years to grieve together and hold each other through this. A lot of my experience with couple grief is one of the other stages of grief, more like the bargaining and the outrage and the blaming drama parts of the grief. And I'm in awe of like, and I'm wondering if some of that was there, or if you guys just went straight to like the sadness and yeah, through the bargaining and through the outrage bits of it and got to that. We share because it sounds really inspiring what you were able to do.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to share a little bit more about that. So first of all, yes, there was plenty of anger and bargaining also involved in the process, um, for sure. But our process of conscious uncoupling really started at the point where we got together and over the years would periodically talk not on some kind of regimented schedule or something, that, but we periodically would talk about what will we do if we ever decide that we're going to split up. So first of all,
Mm.
in the beginning of our relationship, and even so we got when we got together, and then again when we decided to get married to each other, um our commitment to each other always was that we wanted to be together as long as it was what was best for both of us. And actually
Mm.
having that frame from the beginning, I am very aware was a helpful part of our process working the way it did. So there was some logistics and things for that reason that we did not have to deal with, that I think I do feel a lot of people do have to deal with in the moment of deciding to separate. But we had already talked about how we would split everything up, even down to which animals that we had at the time as part of our family we thought would go different places, and what we thought would happen with them, and what we were going to do with
Whoa.
money, what we would do with our house. So having that piece kind of squared away was 100% helpful. Um, the other thing is we really allowed our process to move naturally. It didn't feel at any point like we got ahead of each other in terms of actually making the decision that, yes, we need to end our relationship. It's one of the relationships in my life where I can honestly say we came to the decision that we needed to go separate ways or create more space, basically, um, between us. We came to that decision together. We worked with a really great therapist for about 6 months, once a week for about 6 months. That was a part of it. During that therapy, we were able to untangle what had become a conflict cycle in our relationship, which meant we were able to start talking to each other more honestly again than we'd been able to. And we'd
Mm.
both been feeling for a few years this sense of, if everything stays the same, so it back the same thing, if everything in our relationship stays the same, then we're pretty good. But if we try to talk about the future at all, it becomes obvious we actually want very different things. And that was our sticking point. We didn't sort of stop loving each other, and that made it very hard. But it also, I think, allowed us to move in this way, because there wasn't a resentment build up. There was certainly some
Mm.
anger and things that needed to be processed and little bits that build up, but we kind of cleaned cleaned some of that up, is probably a good way to say it, together in
Mhm.
therapy, even before we actually made the decision to shift our relationship. And another thing I think that helped is we both, well, I believe, I know we both kind of saw it coming, because Steph in particular had some things that would come up for her, and she would then avoid them to avoid creating the ending that in
Mhm.
fact did happen once she was able to and feeling ready to be completely honest about what was going on with herself and me. And then for myself, it can be a little in a mystical way, but I had had some visions, really intense visions of myself living in a tiny house and like moving in this community direction. And I had started, there was one very important point where I let myself cry for basically 2 days, because I could feel in my system that, wow, what I really most deeply want for myself and my life isn't compatible with this person that I've made my life with, because it's not going to work for her. So part of it was having that intentionality the whole time. And then part of it was we got pretty good once we had crossed the threshold. Okay, we've ended our relationship. We're in this sweet but also incredibly painful time period where we know Steph's about to leave and move to a different city. Um, there we had good communication around what's too much to hold for each other. So we
Mm.
could be together and cry for a time, but then one or both of us would be able to signal, hey, I don't have more space for this right now. And then we'd separate, and really respecting
Mm.
that need both to be together grieving, but also the need to not hold everything foreign with each other was very
Mhm.
powerful and helpful. Each of us knowing that we could go. So basically, we stopped therapy once the therapist really helped us get to the point where we'd fully made the decision and committed to it. And then we picked up on our own with our separate support systems and being able to support each other. And then we did take quite a lot of time once that move happened and we're physically separate. Then there was a period of time of um, both needing some space from each other to allow our own processes to unfold. And then being able to pick up and start a friendship after that was helpful. One of the other things we did was the entire time, the language that we used and how we framed what we were doing wasn't as a relationship ending, even though there were huge things ending. We framed it as a transition from the beginning. And I think even that was very
Mm,
helpful. Um, and allowed us to be present with each other. We made a Spotify playlist together during that time that we were both contributing to, so we could both listen to it on our own without grief. We never really listened to it together, but we made it together. Like we both put songs into it, things like
mhm,
this. Yeah. I just noticed this is a thing I could probably keep talking about for a while, but I think this is also a good place to
mhm.
pause or stop.
Yeah, thank you. That was really beautiful, inspiring, and I love the transition bit because I get that this is what you're pointing to, even with your relationship with death, like with Dulce and the physical death, but really like this is a transition instead of end of the world bad or something like this with death. I get that you're pointing also to all of this change being as transition. It goes like this. It doesn't just go like this and looking back, but it's somehow, yeah, maybe non-linear and feeding itself and more magical and more and mysterious than we can imagine. Thank you, Angie. I'm really glad. There definitely is more. If I don't know if I, yeah, this could totally be another episode, and we'll see what happens with that. But uh, thank you for sharing, and yeah, I'm
Yeah.
I'm just coming away really inspired and touched, and the candle thing really sticks out with me as like writing something on a candle, and I never thought about this. This is something I will take with me for my own practice as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for having me on here, Austin. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to connect with you, and this has actually put me back in touch in a different way with some of my own process and the beauty in it, and the tenderness. And I love that the story that you shared too about the person on the phone today in your work call that was able to hold that space. It's just such a beautiful reminder about yeah, that we're all here together and there are in fact
Mm-hmm.
people that care.
Mm-hmm.